my spooky friends, it is Stacy and welcome to another tutorial where I create an alien using air foam clay. Now I was inspired by the northern lights with all these solar storms dancing through the air. Everyone across the globe got an opportunity to see these lights, which are so stunning and beautiful. And so for that paint scheme alone, I am using Mehron's UV and neon paints for this to make it look more bold and beautiful. And when it comes to bold and beautiful makeup, I am collabing with a good friend of mine in Sweden. Her name is Sminkberoende, and I love that her name in English translates to make it dependent. She reviews a lot of indie brand makeup that has those wonderful duochromes, and she comes up with these stunning and these just masterful art pieces of artwork just on the eyelid alone. So she's very inspiring, and her makeup collection, I think, fits absolutely perfect with this theme. So I wanted there to be a beauty and then a special effects portion with the airfoam clay. So I hope you enjoy it. Check out her information below, and let's just go ahead and roll the footage. To create the height and shape, I'm using plastic Easter grass, where I cut out some plastic and taped it together. I placed that on top of my head cast, and then I took a ball cap and I taped around all the edges. I am going to be using plaster gauze strip because I need a surface that I can sculpt on that will not collapse. For my release agent, I'm using Vaseline, and I covered the entire ball cap all over in most of the areas that I'm going to be sculpting. This is going to help the plaster release a lot easier. With a bowl of cold water, I dip my strips in and remove the excess water by running my fingers down each side. I get this placed all over my cast, putting it a little bit lower than what I need because plaster strips have a tendency to tear once being removed, and if you're seeing the gauze strips inside the plaster, continue to move that around so you don't have any weak spots. Never put any plaster water into your drains. Always find a proper way to dispose it. And now that it has dried, I am going to try to release this. And I had a few things working against me this entire sculpt. This Friday night, that once I actually did my plaster strips, I ended up in the emergency room because of my heart racing again. And these plaster strips had several days to dry. I like to remove them before they get completely dry because, as you can see here, I had a lot of tearing, and that's what happens, and that's another reason why I put these on a little bit lower than what I need. So once I get this released, I remove my ball cap in the pouch that I created with the grass, and when I go through and I place this back on top of the head, I get an idea about how far I can get away with cutting around the edge and still keep the shape. So I took some scissors and I got rid of anything that tore to make it more uniform. I then covered my cast with plastic because I want this airfoam clay to release a lot easier. Several reasons: it will stick to the plaster cast, and also I need to tend to my head cast with another coat of wood glue for easier release. So I'm taking airfoam clay and I knead it, and then I roll it, making sure not to roll it too thin, and I get that placed over the top. And check the description below if you are interested in finding out the airfoam clay that I normally use for projects like this. And so I had to put it up for the night, and I taped some chopsticks onto my cast because I do not want my plastic to touch and create texture in my sculpt. I then get my shapes into place, making sure that this nose and the bridge goes up over the eyebrow because I do not want to block out my eyebrows for this look. So I just began creating a shape, and then I push that shape up into the rest of the pieces. Now the idea behind a lot of this sculpt is the Aurora Borealis and the way they dance throughout the sky, so not a lot of harsh edges. And I roll up another piece of airfoam clay and I place that around the edge of the skull, and I begin to press that in to the other clay, and then begin with water and some more tools, including my fingers, and begin to smooth that edge out. I do the same thing for the other side, rolling some more clay and placing that over the edge, and then begin to press that into the other pieces of foam so I get a more universal look and I get rid of the seams and things are as smooth as possible. The idea is to wear this as a complete mask, that way I'm not having to use ball caps or any other methods to cover up the ears. When I'm smoothing out anything and attaching it to another piece of clay, I like to use my fingers, that way I can feel whether or not it's becoming smooth, and also I don't sculpt it too thin. And going in with another piece of rolled clay, I go up underneath that first piece and then I pinch it together so it comes to more of an edge, but it also gives me the opportunity to have thicker scoring to put a design into the clay. I then score in some shapes onto the other side. And the deeper this you can put your shapes into the clay is how you're going to create that really effective highlight and shadow. So I think it makes the paint more dramatic. And I go into the top, and with a tool that has a rubber edge, I go in and I create some half shapes. I was thinking about crop circles and things like that. So I put in some lines, I put in some half crescent shapes, and I use a dotting tool to add some more detail. Using another piece of rolled foam, I go in and carve out the cheekbone area, working that up into the orbital socket, and then taking some smaller pieces and creating a transition between the eyebrow into the eye socket, making sure that toward the bridge of the nose that this shape is pressed in for more of a seamless look, but also keeps that alien shape in the eyes. I then continue to fill in the gaps, making sure that I get this covered around the ears, and then I go back through and smooth things out with my finger. Be sure to keep a spray bottle on hand because it's important that your sculpt does not dry out too fast, and you can just spray it occasionally as you're working on other pieces. That is fine, and it's the best thing to do. But things get a little bit out of hand here in a few minutes. As you will see, I was running out of clay, so I used the majority of the clay I had to finish the chin, and I began to sculpt that, thinking I would keep the lips human. And then my power went out for several hours. I am in the south, so the house got about 80, 81 degrees, so it stopped me from being able to control how fast the clay was drying. Paired that with a thinner piece, and here we have mass chaos. So I'm going up underneath with a tool, and I'm going up underneath the plastic to release it. And normally this would just release just fine, but I do have to cut to the back of this head to get it to come up over the dome of my head. And so what happens, you see that the smaller pieces that dried, or the thinner pieces that dried way too fast, started to break up. So then I cut more from the back, which was fine because I was able to glue that back later. But once I broke that orbital bone, that socket at the bottom, I then just gave up and went for it, and just knew that I was going to have to repair this. So I just went for it and just to get it released, and this is what happens. So you're about to see how to repair such a problem. Okay, so the damage is done. As you can see how things busted up on this right side, but that's okay. I'm going to go back through and I'm going to patch it up and use different pieces of airfoam clay like band-aids. And I promised you guys a very long time ago when I first started my channel that if I run into errors, I'm going to show you. I am not perfect, and this is okay. It's just fun, and there's different ways that you can do to fix things. So I go back in and I put more plastic, and I then take more pieces that are not as thin. And I go in and I begin to push everything into the clay and make sure that it is as seamless as possible, because sometimes after the fact that this happens, you have to rely on the paint job to hide some of the flaws, which is what I prefer not to do. I don't rely on a paint job to fix anything. I try to do it right the first time, and that did not happen. So this is me going back through and repairing it. So I have to let that dry. And once it was dry, I still was a little bit unsure about what to do with the mouth. So I just given it time to dry. to see how it settles and see what my paint job is looking like. And this is the pastel green from the Mehron palette, and just get everything covered as a base because I am going to paint this to where the colors show up and they're contrasting colors without the black light, and then you also see the black light. I'm going in and painting the details in the top of the head, and I'm using my dotting tool to keep the universal shape, and this is the teal in the pastel paint. And then to bring out those details that we scored in, I'm using a contrasting color with the darkest purple from this pastel palette. I then go back in with blue to give this a little bit more dimension. With the UV yellow paint, I'm taking a paper towel, dipping that in water, and just tapping that into my pan and tapping that all over the green. It does not show up a whole lot. This is just so when you see it, it has something very stark and contrast when it's UV. So the concept is to put paints on top of the darker paints so that once the black light hits it, you can see it looks a bit different. And so now I have to use my black light to touch up any of the UV, making sure that things are uniform, and to make sure that those etchings that we put in on the side show up a little bit more. I go in with a white because it does not show up against these darker paints, but it does show up when it is hitting the black light. I then take some UV purple, and then I just begin to blot out a little bit around the edge in the design. And these are water active paints, so you can get by with blending a lot easier. And so checking again and going back through and just tidying things up, making sure it looks like I want it to look when the black light hits it, and then when the black light does not hit it. I also do some pink and purple pastels around the nose, and then once I can see everything, I've got the UV paints exactly like I want them. I go back in and I decided that I am not going to deal with its mouth and try to use human lips, so I just took away that element, creating that iconic look that you see in depictions about aliens all the time. And so I needed something shiny for the eyes because I was not using anything else. And honestly, with the ER visit and with the power going out and the fact that this was a collab and that we had a date, I had to get some things done quickly. So then took this foil from a package and I glued those in the inside so that when the light hits it, it has a nice shine. Pink ties into the colors, and then also I painted some catch lights using white paint and UV paint. So now it's time for the application. So I put it on my mask and I put in a line because I do not want to paint my entire face. This is just a guide so I don't have to do that. And I get my pastel green all over my chin, neck, shoulders, and chest. I go in with my purple pastel to create some elements that match the design at the top of the head. I then use the back of a brush to create some dots using two different colors of pink. I then take some UV paint and I etch that into the design, making sure that it's lighter so it pops off against the dark color so it looks good with and without the black light. I then took the Kat Von D Pastel Goth palette and used the yellow to highlight my collarbone. I then took a dark green to make those collarbones pop out by pushing the shadow up above and below them to make that collarbone extend a little bit further out and more alien-like. I then took a gold shimmer to really make those collarbones pop out against the green paint. Here is the final look. I hope you guys enjoyed this one today. Were you able to see the northern lights from your area? Let me know what part of the world you're in the comments below. And don't forget to check out Sminkberoende and her beautiful makeup look. Please subscribe if you like fun, affordable makeup that will not break the bank. And if you're enjoying this video, why not check out this next one? And I'll see you guys next time. Bye now.